Hi, my name is Richard Devine. I'm an artist and electronic producer from Atlanta, Georgia, and I'm here to talk about Unfiltered Audio's new plugin called SILO. In this video, I will take you through a detailed explanation of all the controls and features from left to right, and also demo some sounds. You can navigate with the chapter markers to skip to any section of the video you wish to watch first. So what SILO really is a granular processing plugin that has a built-in spatializer and reverb. So it uses a combination of these three modules that are built into one plugin. And you also have some other controls for your Granulator section. And it uses some unique features that allow you to animate and move around these grains in a space, as well as having control over each of the grains and how the grains interact within the incoming audio in lots of unique ways. And then at the end of the chain here, they've added a really cool reverb section that can also have the ability to do some interesting things that add sort of the intel part of the signal chain in SILO. So the combination of all three gives you these really flexible, interesting palette of tools to really twist and mangle the sound in really unique ways. Right now, I have it set up on an audio channel here of a recording of this sort of like, I want to say it's a sort of kind of bell tone. I'm just going to play through it so you can hear what it sounds like dry. And I'm going to solo it. It's like this sort of shimmery bass tone, or the shimmery bell tones that you're hearing. Pretty dry. So I'm going to go back to the beginning and I'm going to let you hear what it sounds like with the composition that plays at the beginning. So here's how that layer works with everything else. Now that we hear how that element is working, so what is SILO doing to it? So I've had SILO just bypass, but now I'm going to unmute SILO so you can hear actually what it's adding to this layer in the track. So I'm going to go ahead and play it once again clean. I'll start here from the beginning, and then I'm going to unbypass it. So here we go. So let's hear what happens when I unbypass it. Instantly you can hear a difference. There's a lot more spatial movement. There's a bit of pulsing of the amplitude, and you can hear the grains kind of shifting some of those notes around to give it a lot more animation and movement. You can see it's also adding a bit of space because there's a reverb section, a spatializer section, and a granular section. So let's break this section down into three parts to where we could easily understand what's going on with what SILO is doing. So let's take a first look at the Granulator section. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to turn off my spatializer and turn off my reverb. And we're going to just take this this sort of bell tone sound, and I'm going to just play what the granulator section is doing to it. So let's step back here, and I'm going to we'll just play it dry for a reference again. And then I'm going to unbypass silo. So as soon as you hear it here, you can hear just what the granular section is doing. Now these controls right here you see at the top, size, rate, pitch, and speed, are all the things that we're hearing affecting here, as well as the spread, reverse, the window shape, and the freeze. And then you see these, what's called the Euclidean mask that you see spinning around here. Then there's some other functions here, the pause grains, pause right and clear. And this is all that we're dealing with right here, is what's coming in here into this. What's this section here is the sort of like oscilloscope or waveform view. And then we also have our buffer section here. The buffer section allows us to define the sample rate. We also have time in milliseconds up to 10 seconds of how much of the buffer we want to capture here in Silo. And then you can also set the tempo range that all of this is interacting at. So you can do 1/8, 1/4, or 1/2 a bar. So what's interesting about this is, like, we'll first take this one step at a time. So the size knob control sets the length of the individual grains. So I can open this up. I can hear that the grains are getting bigger. If I bring that down, listen how much that cuts the decay time. It's almost like these tiny little particles as I move the knob over to the left. I'll move it back open again. You can see how much that changes the length of the grain size. The next one is the rate knob, and the rate knob sets how frequently the new grains are generated. So if I turn this up, you'll see that the activity increases. You can see this shown in the oscilloscope window here. I'll slow that back down. The next important knob is the pitch transposition knob that you see here. This sets the pitch for the individual grains. But this does not affect the playback speed that you hear of the original sample. So if I just turn this up, you'll hear what I'm saying. Just transposing it up. So back to the normal position. And then the speed that we see here. The speed sets how quickly the grain plays through the buffer. Once again, it doesn't affect the playback pitch, so we can just change this and just see what happens, and watch what happens to the playback heads here, and that's playing through the buffer. Okay, so underneath that, there's a couple other cool functions. You'll notice that there's these boxes underneath, these display boxes. And what these are basically different modes that are associated with each one of these knobs. So the first one is time for the size. And as you can see here, this dialog help info window tells you it's the length of each grain is explicitly given in milliseconds. If we select tempo for size, you'll see that it says that the length of each grain is set as a division of the DAW of your tempo. So if I set that here, you'll automatically see that now this is set to 1/64th, and we could set this to any other division or multiplication of that, 1/16th, 1/8th, and you can hear how that is actually changing the grain size to that division. So you also have ratio, which works in increments of speed. P ratio in a similar fashion. Rate here, we have two controls for frequency and tempo. Tempo can also be set. The rate can also be set to divisions that runs to your master tempo of your DAW. And then here for pitch, we also have note and tuning. So we can switch that as well. And the notes and semitones going up or down. And then, of course, the speed control. We have some interesting modes here, and I'm going to let the info display. So in speed mode, when we have it set to the first one, skip, in this mode, it's going to skip different grains as it's playing through the buffer, so you can kind of get these cool stagnant sort of things happening. In ratio mode here, it controls the speed that the head smoothly moves through, with 1 times x being the speed as the right head navigates values that make the read head move backwards. So if we go to offset, I'll set this to display here so you guys could see what that is saying. The offset is the read head stays behind the right head by a fixed amount given in milliseconds. This is ideal for creating granular delay effects. And then we have the T offset. T offset is the same as offset mode, but the delay is given in tempo units. So what's really cool about this, you can set these in any combination to come with sort of different rhythmic effects and skip effects that kind of change the way the buffer and the grains are interacting with each other here. And one other cool feature I want to talk about is these boxes underneath here. So you'll see that these green lines around the knobs, this is showing me the rate range that I have currently selected for each one of these boxes underneath here. Now these are the deviation controls. The deviation here sets the amount of length of randomization that will occur for each grain, right? So this is pertains for grain size. So if I send this up, this is going to modulate and cause random deviation between this range here for this knob. And I could set that also for the rate knob and also for pitch. And you can hear how much this is going to change, and listen to the, I'm going to set up the speed. So you can hear some pretty interesting stuff happening already. So I can also set these down, but this gives you a little bit of extra automation of these parameters if you want for each one of these 4 controls in the Granulator field. Now underneath that, we've got some other controls. We have the spread, which is the slight difference, which adds like sort of a slight difference between the grains on the left and right hand channels to give you this almost like chorusing effect in a way. So if I start here, you'll hear that if I turn the spread up, you'll just hear like this detuning chorusing effect happening to the buffer as it's playing. And then on reverse, this will select, it'll set sort of a probability that sets a probability that the individual grains will be reversed. So I can set this up, and you'll hear some reverse. And then after that, we have the shape. This controls the shape of each one of the grains. So right now, I can shift that around and listen how much that changes the envelope, amplitude of the grain in the buffer. And this is displayed here in the window next to it. Right now, we have the Hamming shape selected, but I could select Blackman or any of these other ones. And you can see the triangle, exponential, and as you shift the shape, you can see it applies different exponential curves to give you more of these smoother ramps and different shapes depending on the grain size you have set. And then here we have the freeze control, which determines how much of the old data that was in the buffer will be rewritten. So I could set the freeze up if I want, which is pretty cool, or I could set it back down. And another thing that's going to just reset this is that you can actually grab the buffer playback head and just scroll through the sample if you want. So if I set the size down and set the speed up, I can manually with my mouse just grab it and move through the sample if I want. So you can do some really, really cool stuff. So over here to the next section is the Euclidean mask, which applies a rhythmic Euclidean mask to the grain generation right now. So I can scroll down and do different combinations to go counterclockwise. Or if I drive it up to the right, you see these different combinations of grain playback. And underneath that, I can pause the grains. I can unpause them. Right now we're in pause right. Right now this is just letting all the real-time audio pass through. And I can also clear the buffer. So this is nice to kind of clear out stuff if you had unwanted audio that you're working on that was coming in. So the next section, which is cool, is the Spatializer section. So I'm going to flip this on. And here it's called the geometry section. So this is your spatialized field where all the grains are moving in. And you have multiple different modes here. Comets, moons, meteors, stars, shimmer, horizon, ping pong buffer, 3D, 2D, pitch, stereo, and granular. And each of these modes does a different thing. And this is really, really interesting for creating lots of different animation of fields between the different grains within the spatialized field. So this is your location. So it can generate more of the grains. It sets the number of unique simultaneous spatial locations that a grain can appear in. And so this directly applies to these parameters down here below. You have the range. So I can set the range to a maximum distance of spatial locations that can appear from the center. So I can set that up if I want. You'll see that they start to disperse out a bit. And then here we have the velocity. The velocity changes how quickly a spatial location can move. So I can set that up. Now you can start to see there's a lot more animation happening in the spatialized field. And then here, the jump control sets how quickly the active spatial location is changed. So at 0%, the location will remain static. But if I bring it down, you'll see that they eventually stop. But as I drive up the jump knob control, they start animating and moving around the spatializing space here. So from there, one of my favorite parts that they've added into Silo is the final reverb section here. So if I turn it on, you can immediately hear the space, the grains being thrown into this beautiful reverb. Now you've got a couple different controls here. I'm going to let the info screen show up here. So in normal mode, which is what we're in right now, the reverb is just active. If I select it's a solo, we're just hearing just the reverb and not hearing any of the dry grains coming through. If I select balance, balance is giving me sort of like a mixture of both the dry and wet balance, and then the level control basically is a mix between the two. And then right underneath that, we have what's called the tone controls here. This defines the tone quality of the reverb. So right now we're listening to dark. We can go rusty, sat rev, we could do glitter, and each one has its own little distinctive flavor to it. It's really, really fun to kind of play around with these and find the best one. So underneath that, we also have the volume control here, which has several different modes. You've got volume, which basically responds to the level control, and it controls simply how loud the reverb is in the mix. And then there's the chance mode control, which determines the probability of the grain being sent to the reverb. And then there's variation here. If I select this one, which is basically each grain is sent to the reverb at a random level between 0 and X percentage value of the level control. And then the mask section here, which is pretty interesting. Well, immediately you'll see that this Euclidean mask icon shows up now within the level area now. And what that does is it controls rhythmically modifies which grains are sent to the reverb. So you can set this like the other Euclidean mask here. You can set this in any configuration by driving it up or driving it down to get these different patterns that kind of interweave the reverb into the grains. So it gives this really, really interesting organic flow of stuff happening. And underneath that, we have our typical controls for reverb. You've got your decay time. You've got your distance, your dampening for letting more high or low frequencies come in. And we've got a filter, which they've added, which has got several different modes. All the typical flavors here: low pass, high pass, band pass, MS low pass, and MS high pass. An acid LP, which is an emulation of the classic TB303 filter. And then we have our collection of Moog ladder filters here, and the SFV filters here for some sort of a cleaner, refined filters. And then we have this invert button, which is really neat. So if we have this activated, it inverses the exact opposite flip of whatever filter that you have, in whatever filter topology you have, which is, in this case, if it's a low pass filter, it'll invert it to a high pass filter. So it's pretty handy if you don't want to have to fiddle with the drop down menu there. And then finally, we have the compressor setting. This is an overall compressor, because sometimes when you're working on granular processing and granular, especially depending on the sounds material, you can lose a lot of volume depending on what you're mangling or whatever you're processing. And what the compressor knob will do was bring some of that volume back for you. So it's really handy that they've added this feature into the end chain at the mix. And then of course we have our mix knob, which allows you to mix from completely dry to completely wet, or anywhere in between. I usually like to have it at the 1 o'clock position. And then we have our output section here, which is really cool, that just gives you an LED readout of how loud the signal is coming in and out. And a couple cool things I want to show you guys here. Let me go back to this. I'm going to do the start here. You'll notice, let me bring my volume down here a little bit, is if I right click, I can add a lock icon to any parameter inside the plugin. And this is for every control. Every control that you see in here can have a lock parameter. Now, if you notice up here to the right-hand side, you see this dice icon. Now, if I hit that dice icon, it will randomize all of the parameters in the plugin, except for everything that I have locked. So any knob control that has a lock icon will stay at that fixed stored position. So if I unlock these, I could just right-click these, and I hit the random dice button again, you'll now see that all of those knobs that I took the lock icon off of are now randomizing. So you could selectively randomize just the parameters you want while leaving the stuff you don't want to tamper with, which I think is a very, very handy feature to have in here. So if we go into the options, it's just a couple things that I feel are really cool to talk about here. Is when we were talking earlier about the randomization deviation controls for each one of the knob controls in the granulator section, you have a randomization depth, what's called drift prevention. So this will allow you to set the modulation random rate of how much you want. So it sets a range of, if you want it to be super random, lower percentage of random, which I think this is really handy. I kind of keep it in the 20 to 30% range, which is really cool. Here you've got your color themes. You can switch the actual color theme of SILO, your resizing functions, and then there's your workflow tooltips, and there's the visualizer for the buffer section. And then the audio section, you have anti-aliasing, also bypass MIDI in, which is a pretty cool feature. When you select or enable this, SILO will ignore incoming MIDI notes. If disabled, incoming MIDI notes from your keyboard, like I have here, will change the pitch of the transposition of the grains. And middle C will provide no transposition, but this is kind of a cool feature if you want to be able to change things on more musical note values from a keyboard. And then your output limiter, which you can disable if you want. So you've got a handful of really incredible features that are action-packed in this really small interface that give you a lot of control and variation over your incoming audio or audio that you recorded into the buffer.